Let's give folks a minute to come in as I watch the numbers go up. All right. Welcome, folks. We are just giving a moment for people to jump into the breakout sessions, and we will get started. All right. So we are about 140, 142. It just keeps going up. So welcome everybody back to our 2023 Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference. I am Bethany Matson. I'm one of the community co-chairs for the conference this year, and also your host and moderator for this session, which we are calling Combating Gatekeeping in Social Work, a Stop ASWB panel. I'm really honored to be here with these folks today, and I'll get to introducing them in just a second, but just a couple of things for you all to be aware of as we get started. We are providing live captioning services, which are available by clicking the captioning icon down at along the bottom of the screen on your Zoom. And then this presentation is being recorded, and it will be available on the conference website soon. I don't have an exact date for when it will be available, but if you check back on the conference website, you will be able to see all of the plenary sessions, both of the plenary sessions, and all of the recorded breakout sessions. So please keep updated with the website, and you will be able to see that. Our chat is disabled, but we will be using the Q&A box. Please use the Q&A box to ask questions of the panelists that are relevant to the panel. If you have questions about CEUs or where to find the recording later, all of that is also on the website, so I would direct you back to that. But for CEUs, by you being here, you used your name and email to register for the conference. And so if you register for CEUs, you will receive them after the conference. The other thing is that all of your cameras and microphones are muted and will remain muted. But again, please use the Q&A features to answer questions. And as we go through the panel, we will try to address as many of those as possible. We have about almost 200 people here, so we may not be able to get to every single question, but as they come up, we will try to answer questions. And the panel is going to go over a lot of information today. We will hopefully get your questions answered. The other thing is that we want to make sure that also on the website, we will share resources about the panel today. So again, please keep up with the conference website, and you will get all of the information you need today from this presentation. So what I want to do is just introduce everybody on the panel. I'm not going to read their bios. They're going to just tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we will get started. So again, my name is Bethany Matson. Just a visual description of me. I am a 40-year-old Black woman, short, faded, some blondish hair, wearing red lipstick, a Black shirt with white bold lettering that says Amplify Black Women, yes indeed, and in front of a Japanese blossom background. So that is me. And so now I will move into our panel. Today, we are really honored to have some of the members of the Stop ASWB coalition. I don't know if it's called a coalition, but I'm going to call it a coalition for today. So I want to go ahead, say their names, and then pass it on to each one to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about who they are, where they're from, and then we'll get into our discussion. So today we have with us Cassandra Walker, Shimon Cohen, Kim Young, and Jen Hirsch. And Cassandra, Cassie, I'm going to pass it off to you to start with introductions.
Hi, yeah, I'm Cassie. Full name's Cassandra, just use Cassie. My pronouns are they, them. I am a light-skinned, Black, non-binary person, most people would say I look more feminine. I have long braided hair that is a sparkly purple in the front with sparkly black in other areas. I am wearing a white button-up shirt sitting in front of a rainbow hexagonal background with white hexagons in the middle. And I'm look like I'm around my 30s. So yeah, happy to be here. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Illinois.
Thanks, Cassie. Shimon, you want to introduce yourself next?
Sure, grateful to be here. My name's Shimon Cohen, 45-year-old white Jewish male. I've got short brown hair and a beard with a little bit of gray in it that I've earned. And I've got a gray t-shirt on. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Miami, Florida. I'm a social work educator. I have a podcast called Doing the Work, Frontline Stories of Social Change, and I teach online education, continuing education with my co-instructor, Charlotte Yearwood, who's also part of this larger coalition. Thanks.
Thanks, Shimon. And Kim, you want to go next?
Sure. Good afternoon, y'all. My name is Kim Young. I am a chocolatey Black woman that is proudly wearing a wide brim fedora. I'm wearing a logo, a sweatshirt, but I'm not going to drop the name of that company because they're not sending me no check. I am in front of my virtual background that has my logo that says Dope Black Social Worker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker out in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but I'm originally from California. I run a company. That's the logo behind me, Dope Black Social Worker, which is a growing brand in the community that really is focused on increasing the presence of Black social workers in this field so folks know they look like people like me, as well as, like I said, just building community. And ultimately, I'm just a really good troublemaker. So I'm excited to be in this space with you all today.
Thanks, Kim. And last but certainly not least, Jen.
Hi, everybody. I am Jen Hirsch. I am a white non-binary person in my mid-30s with short, dark brown, almost blackish hair. I have a dark blue shirt on with floral print and a teal cardigan today. I am a licensed clinical social worker in Michigan and a doctoral student at Michigan State University, and happy to be joining you all today.
Thank you all. I'm really excited for this panel, so I hope that y'all watching are really excited and just see that we got a lot of intelligent and wonderful people here today. And so I want to just jump right into it and just first start off with providing some context, because I understand that some people may not be fully aware of like what is going on and kind of like where Stop ASWB started from. So we want to start from the very beginning and just give some context to this issue. So who wants to kick us off with our history lesson for the day?
I can start. So the past couple of years, there's been a lot of push against ASWB, the Association of Social Work Boards, to release pass rate data broken down by demographics. And they've slowly hinted that they were going to potentially do that, that their board was voting on it. And finally, in August, we got a data release of information. It is not everything that everybody would want, but it describes through their different exams the pass rate disparities among Black social workers and other racial groups, about non-English speaking social workers, older social workers. We didn't get disability information. So that was released in August, right before everybody goes back to school and things get busy. And a lot of us on Twitter were like, hey, this is really not okay. We knew it was going to be bad, but they also made choices in the publication of it. Like they put eventual pass rates instead of primary pass rates because it made the data look a little bit better than it really was. And so a group of us got together to say, we need to make a lot of noise about this. This is really unacceptable. So we came together through Twitter and we wrote a petition on change.org that has just under 10,000 signatures at this point, to say this needs to change, and we asked for a few specific things. And the link will get sent out with materials. I think that's a very brief overview. What other details do you guys want to add?
So I think it's important to note that this has been a fight since the inception of ASWB, which was established among great protest among Black social workers and many, many other allied and other groups of social workers in the 60s and 70s. And so this fight for data and this fight for transparency has been ongoing, and the knowledge that there's a problem with the test did not start on August 5th, 2022, when this was released. And so this is really just now that we have the data that people were like, well, we don't have rates. We don't have rates. We can't say this. We don't have rates. We don't know. We knew. And so now this is kind of the evolution of the push, and the work being done is across the US and Canada where the test is being used. And the biggest focus of the work is per locality, per state or per province, as that's where a lot of the decision making is made. Because as you all may or may not have noticed, or may not know at this point, every state's licensure is different, which is painful in its own right and a whole nother panel to have. We'll get into some of that here just because of compact issues and how they interweave, but it is important to note those items as well, and that the biggest impacted groups, based on what little data we do have, are Black folks, older folks, and folks whose first language is not English.
And to just add on to that, just so we can state some of the, so people here know the numbers. The first time pass rates on the clinical exam, and I'm using the terminology that ASWB uses, white social workers have an 84% first time pass rates, and then an eventual pass rate of 91%. And like has been stated, we don't know what eventual means. We don't know if that took 10 times to pass or if 2 times, we don't know. And that's a lot of money every time people have to retake the exam. Black social workers have a 45% pass rate on prime first time, 57% eventual. Hispanic, 65% first time, 77% eventual, and Indigenous, 63% first time and 74% eventual. So those are some huge differences in pass rates.
And just to clarify for folks that are listening, Shimon, are you referring to the clinical exam pass rates? Because we
yeah, clinical. And so then, right, a lot of the question and the discussion becomes, how do you explain these differences? And the way ASWB explains it is very different from how we explain those differences, which we're going to get into on our panel.
I want to answer this question. The question is, do other countries require testing? And this is quick, and we can talk about it more later if we want, but no, they don't.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview. And so just from that, and it doesn't even we haven't even really got into the meat of the situation, but you all can see what the issue is that we have this exam that has become a barrier for folks to get into the social work field before you even start practicing social work, which is again a different panel of what it means to actually then, if you are able to get licensed, and what you will experience and deal with once you are doing the work. But even to do the work, we have this barrier. So people are spending you know, $50,000, $60,000 plus $1,000 to get degrees. And then this exam is stopping them from being able to practice because in most states, almost every state, you need a license to be able to provide a lot of social work practice. So this is stopping folks from going into basically a lot of like lower paying jobs anyways, and they are spending thousands of dollars to take this exam multiple times. And so it's a huge issue. And it's one that I think as social workers, we need to be very aware of and paying attention to. We talked about like who is harmed and who is impacted, but I also want to ask a little bit more around like these ideas of like all these groups that are impacted, because we didn't get rates on ability of participants, or I'm sorry, test takers. We didn't get that. And this conference is focused on disability justice. And so I do want to dig a little bit deeper with the panel to talk about some of the implications of them leaving that out of the data release, and kind of like thoughts around that, and how do we get this information and have a better understanding of why it is important to gather that information.
Just real quick before we go there, also just to frame this about the exams in general, that everyone really needs to know is these exams have never been shown to predict someone's ability to be a good social worker. So everyone, like all of us who are licensed, everyone who's trying to get licensed have had to do an exam. Why? Like for what? Because so we're automatically on the defensive when we have to challenge this exam, because the exam has been in existence for so long, it's just considered normal. And so then we have to go against normal. But why is it even normal? Why do we even have this when it doesn't do anything? They say it's for public safety, but it's never been shown to do that anyway. All it's doing is actually keeping out certain groups to be social workers. So I think that leads in, Bethany, to exactly what you're talking about.
And another layer to think about is the multiple exams. So depending on if you get a bachelor's and you want to practice with a bachelor's license, there's a bachelor's exam. Every state has slightly different requirements when it comes to whether or not they use their exam at different levels. But there are a lot of states that do, when you get a master's degree, for example, have you take a master's exam right after you graduate before you can get the initial master's, like limited level license, practice for 2 years and get supervision, and then take another clinical level test. So for some social workers, depending on what your career looks like, depending on the state, there are multiple layers of these tests that have disparate outcomes depending on the groups. And that compounds over and over again. So one of the things that we are seeing in some states that are moving forward with trying to make changes, Illinois and Rhode Island did some work before the data release, is that states are starting to try to work on dropping bachelor's and master's level tests. There isn't a solution yet to replacing the clinical exam. And that, like Shimon said, doesn't necessarily have any data to support that passing the test is aligned with your ability to practice social work. But those layers, I think, also add additionally to the harm. ASWB also creates a model act. So part of states being all over the place, they, in theory, all got together and said, this is what our model act is going to be that we're all going to try to sort of use. And of course, that model act has the exam at every level of license. They also have an advanced generalist exam for macro practice. And so as more states kind of climbed onto that model act, that then leads to our interstate compact also having the exam at every single level. And so it's, to me, there's a bit of a conflict of interest if they are supposed to be a membership organization for the boards and helping set laws and legislations, but they also then financially benefit through the fees for testing through that legislation. That really should be two separate entities, in my perspective. It gives them way too much power. That they want to claim, oh, we're just doing the bidding of the boards, but we know that that is not true based on the experience in Illinois and Rhode Island and in other states. ASWB will push states to adhere to different rules to allow them to use their test. So Michigan, for example, didn't require 2 years of supervision before you took the clinical for a long time, and ASWB pushed them that no, you absolutely have to. You can't let students take it while they're doing supervision. They have to finish their supervision because ASWB claims that they would do better. And there's other states that are like this that have been pushed, right? And ASWB would claim that, oh, after supervision, students would be able to pass better, but the state's experience was anecdotally that was not true. And now we have the data to show age-wise is not true. And so all of this, is very suspect and to me, not necessarily the most ethical practice on ASWB's part.
And so, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just truly want us to remember or try to reconnect with the idea that we always didn't have an exam, y'all. And so when we start to question, like, how do we measure competency? The exam never did that. I know plenty of social workers and therapists that pass the exam that are incredibly incompetent. And y'all know some too. And so the exam is not a measurement of competency, nor does the exam protect the public. The exam is simply a barrier and allows for this field to remain classes and in many ways incredibly white and incredibly female. And so when you start to find yourself in a position of defending an exam like ASWB, I want you to really question who and what are you trying to protect? Because it's not people that look like me.
Yeah, and so there's been a bunch of questions. Y'all may have noticed I am with the quickness answering questions. So some things out loud. All of this data is publicly available on through ASWB's site. Additionally, the materials for this session that will be sent to you has a beautiful resources list that has all of that stuff listed and linked. Is like, we were going to keep it short. We did not keep it short. It's like 5 pages. So that will be coming out with the emails and the CEUs and all that jazz. Also, we got to get it in a separate document if we haven't done that already, y'all. But there is data for folks asking. No, they did not give us disability data. Yes, there is data for Asian folks. They did not differentiate Asian and Pacific Islanders. So it's randomly somewhere between the categories of multicultural, Asian, and Native/Indigenous is probably where that demographic is split. ASWB is bad at data. They are bad at research, and they're bad at demographics. That, again, is another thing we can discuss more in depth. Additionally, as far as the questions about the barriers and what states have what, that information is rapidly changing. Everyone has clinical level licensure, also called independent level licensure. Beyond that, it is highly variable and changes frequently. You have states like California that both have clinical exams and a jurisprudence exam. You've got states like Illinois where we've gotten rid of our provisional generalist exam, but we still have clinical, but there's no jurisprudence. And so that information, we are not going to be able to give you a rundown of what every state is and what they require. That will be your homework for today, to do some Googling, because otherwise that would take all session. Additionally, these states, that's part of why we're seeking that is why the compact is coming out. That's why you will see, so psychologists have PsyPact, and social work is trying to do something similar that would allow easier portability across states, because right now it's horrific. You're basically beholden to the state, like the state you are in owns your ability to work. And there is no uniform ability to cross state lines, which in a country that is supposedly united is wild, and deeply problematic in the age of telehealth. I do, as you can tell, like I do telehealth. That is how I do therapy now. And the fact that I can't see someone in Madison, which is 3 hours north of me, but I can see someone three hours south of me because it's still technically Illinois, is wild. But I can teach in Madison. I can I can do all of these sorts of things. And so we like that is something's work that's being worked on. But the problem is these tests are being included. And because of that variability as well, they're having to put language, but then also not everyone has passed the test because the test is younger than my parents. And so we have an entire slew of social workers that never had to take the test and will never have to take the test, and they're trying to protect their ability to not have to take this test, because the older you are and the more experienced you are, the worse you do on these tests. And so there are significant barriers, from the money, from knowledge standpoint. The more you know, the worse you do. And so, yeah, I'm going to stop there for now. I think I answered all the ones I said I was going to answer.
I'll also add the detail, some of these questions about state-based stuff. When ASWB released their data, they also released information by state and by school. So you can look that up on the ASWB.org website. Somewhere on the ASWB's website, they also have an Excel spreadsheet that may or may not be out of date, that you can download the licensing requirements across all of the states and all of the provinces in Canada as well. So some of that information ASWB does put out if you really want to dig into all of those details.
And if it's helpful, the process, the different steps are different, but the processes are pretty similar. So across the country, in each state, there is some sort of licensing board. So wherever you were located, there's a board that has oversight over licensure in your state. And then they go into agreement with the ASWB to use their exam for their clinical or independent clinical tests. And so if you're trying to just figure out where do you start or who's making those decisions for you, it's going to be your licensing board. And then from there, it's very likely that they receive their rules and mandate from your state legislator. And so everyone's process is relatively the same if you're looking for your starting point or who you're mad at or where to point your rage.
Mm-hmm. And for those of us who are in Wisconsin, the issues with our state licensing board, if you don't know about them, if you haven't had the same process of like applying for a license and waiting months or a year to even get any of your documents looked at, because our DSPS, Department of Safety and Public Services, which manages all that, is so behind that the legislator did get involved in trying to address that. And still there are significant delays. So I know that a lot of folks who have graduated over the past year or two have really been blocked from even being able to sit for this exam, because you have to wait for them to give you permission to sit for the exam, but then to actually get your license. And so just to add that to, I don't know what other state boards do, because every board is different. And again, it's more money, because every time you apply for a license in a different state, you pay that state for the license. So you are talking about, if you want to be licensed in multiple states, you are talking about several hundred, maybe thousands of dollars to get licensed in multiple states. And so I think one of the things that we have to go back to the disability question at some point, but just talking about the piece around the nightmare that is licensing across states so that you can be able to practice in multiple states. But also the people who are on the social work boards, and I know this is coming up, but talking about that piece of who to direct your rage to. And I would love for the panel to just address the people on the social work boards and kind of some of the responses that you all have seen with this movement since we've been since the petition came out, and kind of like what that reaction has been from the people who are making a lot of decisions and are in partnership with ASWB. I think there's been a variety of responses from boards. So I do want to move into that question as well.
So I feel bad because we didn't answer the disability one. So I'm going to do that one first.
Go to it. We gonna get it. We gonna get it.
Which is, so like, how does this all tie in? Everything's interconnected. You heard it in the keynote last week. If you were there, if you haven't, like, everything's interconnected. And so when we're talking about these tests, we are talking like this model of professionalization of medicalized fields, of which social work is one, was designed by a dude who didn't believe Black people should be in medicine, who didn't believe that disabled people should be, you know, a part of this side of the system. So of course these things don't work for us. Of course they are prohibitive. Of course the ASWB doesn't keep your accommodations in the system and makes you reapply every time you have to take the test. Like, we are talking about an unnecessary barrier that's got multiple unnecessary barriers on top of it, particularly for the groups that we, one, need the most, and two, are the most unlikely to be able to jump these hurdles. We are talking about people who are statistically more likely to be broke. We are talking about people who statistically are more likely to be abused and underpaid and ignored by the system. And who are more likely to get denied the things they need. And so the fact that everything is per test, the fact that in many states you only have authorization for a year, and if you don't pass in that time you have to reapply for authorization and wait for that, and that all this stuff is timed but all these systems are so slow, like, that is prohibitive to anyone. And especially when we are talking about the multiplicity and variety of disability, right? Like, if you're anxious and you are having to wait over and over and over again, having to reapply for accommodations that may or may not be given over and over, that's gonna increase your anxiety. The testing centers are, depending on where you are, again, in Illinois, the testing center felt like going into a prison. They pat me down, they took my stuff, they fingerprinted me, like, it's a test, y'all. Like, other professions are trying to get rid of their test period, as like we are. But like, lawyers get to take the bar from their living room. And so there's so many layers, right? Is the testing center even accessible? Right? Is another question that links into disability. How far do you have to go to your testing center? So when it comes to why this matters from a disability justice standpoint, this is keeping disabled people out of social work the same way it's keeping Black people out of social work. When we need these people, when Illinois got rid of its generalist exam, the LSW, the provisional license, 4,000 more social workers in less than a year. California estimates that over 4,000 people are stuck in limbo between having completed all of their clinical requirements and trying to pass this test. So that's the answer to that question. I just felt bad we didn't do it.
Well, and so they don't keep paperwork, but we can also think about like who has access to getting diagnosed, to have the proper paperwork, to be able to actually get accommodations, right? They are not very like giving with accommodations. When we also talk about candidates who English is not their first language, I think that's another area to really hone in on. They can request additional time up to 2 hours, and you get the use of 2 dictionaries, one that's a bilingual word-to-word dictionary and one that's an English dictionary. They make no effort to actually put it into another language at all. You just get extra time. I will say ASWB has made a few changes in their testing enhancements that came out recently. They're trying to do 3 responses instead of 4, so you might start seeing that as you take the exam. And they're also allowing access to food. But like 2 years ago, trying to get lactation accommodations, you had to go through disability services. They've now changed that, but they had to be pushed to do that. So all of this pushing against their practices and where things are is really what makes change. I think about Alan Detlef has talked about, if enough of us come together, we have the power, right? And I think as we are moving stuff in states, as more people are speaking up and saying this is not okay, we need to get rid of as many exams as possible, we are moving the dial. State legislation, though, takes time. Right? It's not, it has to go through our state legislators. So even if NASW is on board with making changes and advocating for that in your state, it's also a lot of politics when it comes to who are your state legislators and getting them to make changes.
Yep. And for those who are in Wisconsin, I took the master's level exam not that long ago. In 2022, it's not accessible. I was on a cane because I hurt my knee. I had to go up a flight of stairs because it's in an old office building. They walk you out when you need to take a break. You have to stop testing. Someone escorts you out of the room to the hallway to pee. And it's just like, I just want to go pee. Like when I'm working with clients, it's not like I have a security guard escorting me around to go places in the office building, but like just simple things like that. So it is a problem. This accessibility problem it's a problem for all of us because we all have needs, and you spend 4 hours sitting staring at a computer screen trying to answer questions, and you need a break, you need a snack, you need water, and you couldn't have access to any of that during the testing process. And it was a nightmare. And then all of this, you understand like how much you just paid for this exam, probably all the money you spent paying for studying materials, plus you have these degrees that say you a social worker, like you did all of this, and all of this is riding on this exam. So the amount of anxiety of like taking this exam, and we haven't even talked about the reasons that ASWB gave for why these pass rates were so abysmal, which are offensive reasons. So, I mean, we will probably get to that, but the reasons that they gave for why folks have troubles passing this exam are straight up offensive. And so I do want to get to that at some point, but I want to go back to the panel. I'm not talking all this time, but yes. So thank you all for those answers and the disability one. And then I think, did we answer we were going back to the state licensing piece, right? Or
I think Kim wanted to address one of the Q&As that's about the compact. So
yeah, I just didn't want to forget it. Thank you. I didn't want to forget it because I think Cassie mentioned the compacts a little earlier when they were speaking. So I don't know the ins and outs, but when I attended my social work board meeting here in Virginia, their presentation was provided by the Interstate Compact folk. And so, yes, I'm not shocked like many of y'all that the Department of Defense is behind the compact. And the one thing that I remember from the presentation was the primary goal of the social work compact was to make license portability more accessible for military spouses. That was the motivation that they had behind the compact, which then makes me continue to question, well, then who is it really for? They're also clear in saying that, you know, a part of the compact is that you have to pass a qualifying exam. They don't explicitly state that is the ASWB exam, but the way they're kind of skirting around it is to say that you have to pass a qualifying exam. And so, yes, the DoD is behind the compact if y'all are not aware.
Thanks for answering that. And we are going to take a 5-minute break. Sorry to interrupt, Cassie. Sorry to interrupt you. We're going to take a 5-minute break here, and then we're going to come back and pick up with Cassie your thoughts. So keep it in your brain. So y'all, please take a 5-minute break to take care of yourselves, and we will be back at 12:45. All right, we are gonna pick things back up again and welcome everybody back to our session. And so I do want us to move into talking about how ASWB explains the pass rate differences and like what that looks like, because we mentioned that before the break, but I want to get into the conversation around both the reasons that they gave for the differences and like the implications on what ASWB is saying about all of us mostly. I mean, all of us, and then also what it says, what it is saying about them, and like that they administer this exam that is deeply problematic and why they refuse to take any responsibility for that.
I can start. So in their report, I'm going to start like this. If you are providing a service and like a large percentage of people there's some issue with that service, are you going to blame all the people, or are you going to maybe think about how you do things and think about your product? So let's just start with that. And what ASWB chose to do is not look at themselves at all. And that's a conscious decision that someone has to make, which is really interesting given that self-awareness is part of our code of ethics in social work. And most of us have had lots of discussion in our social work education about the importance of self-awareness. But the company that has this much power and makes this much money, $265 per clinical exam, something like that, every time it has to get taken, all the retakes, why don't they have to practice self-awareness? So that, I want to start with that. So they didn't look at anything. They just defended, and they continue to defend, because they had a response basically to the petition and the critique that they issued statements after, doubling down basically on that there's nothing wrong with their exams. There's no bias that can be detected in their exams, which we will get to. There's some statistical stuff on that. But they blamed systemic oppression. They blamed systemic racism for why Black people don't have the same pass rate as white people. So it's like they were trying to acknowledge that in society there are these issues, but somehow their exam is immune from any racism. So it's systemic, it's all in society, but yet they're immune from it. And many of the questions in the exam, part of what the problem is if you answer them, to get the correct answer, you have to answer them in a way that could be very harmful to communities that are already marginalized and oppressed. Like the questions are very pro-call child protective services, force, involuntary hospitalization, pro-police, just to name a few. And then there's just other, like, the standard is the white culture, the white middle class or upper middle class cultural standard, just like it often is in social work. And then everything else is other, but needs to assimilate to that standard to then be deemed acceptable. They didn't say all that. They just said, well, there's systemic oppression. We realize some people might not be able to get as much tutoring, or some people might not have. It's like blaming that Black people aren't educated enough, but it's systemic oppression, because they can't just come out and say, we don't think Black people are as smart as white people, because that would be overtly racist. But that's basically what they're saying. I'll pass.
Yeah, so the ASWB has essentially taken this stance to protect capitalism and white supremacy. And so even in the statement that they provided, I think, well, it came out at the end of August, right? Like after all of the, the statement they provided at the end of August, they really tried to compare other professions like engineering and accounting, something else, and then tried to say because social work is a female dominated profession, it needs to have some level of legitimacy, or it might be called into question as to if it's really effective. And so even as they continue to implement what they believe to be changes, like I think they're piloting free test services or something now for people who are looking to take the exams. I think they believe they're doing radical and equity-based work, but it's actually just incredibly performative because we understand what they're doing. They're a nonprofit organization with a multi-million-dollar revenue stream. We know exactly what they're doing. They're protecting their interests, their pockets, capitalism, and they're really trying to maintain the white power structure that holds up practicing social work in this country and in Canada. And so it's very clear if you're choosing to see them for what and who they are.
And I think that hits the nail exactly on the head, right? We are talking about an organization that, yet again, because it's all the rage ever since Obama, just get a Black person to be your high-powered janitor, I suppose, is hiding behind a Black woman after 4+ decades of whiteness while still maintaining whiteness underneath that leadership. And what we are talking about, as people in the Q&A noted, of like, yes, they are a institution. They are, in fact, a system. And to say something is systemic and as a system say that, but not us, is very obvious to someone who would not have passed their first year of social work school. And I think it is really important to note that so they're right on one account, and that is systemic, which means someone had asked about how this compares to counseling. Well, shocker, the systemic part of this is standardized tests are racist, standardized tests are ableist. We've known that for decades. And you see these kinds of racial ability and age disparities in other helping fields as well. EPPP Part 2, horrific. Actually, slightly worse in some areas than ours. MFT exam, same disparities. Is MFT 30% difference? Can't remember the exact numbers. Counseling, like marriage, family, they all have these problems because these tests are racist. They are designed to keep the undesirables out, and they are effective in doing so. They are not effective in any of the ways they claim to want to show. They are not effective in showing practice. There is no research that has shown that folks who pass the test have better disciplinary outcomes or practical outcomes than people who don't. ASWB does not do differential, Jen will get me on this, does not do some of the things that they're supposed to do when testing these exams for bias. There is no way to tell people who failed by one question that the question they failed by was later found to be biased and actually they should have had their license. There's no recourse. There's no recourse for that. And again, if we're talking about this kind of high stakes test that is keeping both people out of positions and people away from being able to access care because people are being kept out of positions, this is a holistic, all around issue that is messing us up. People noting, places not hiring, people being unable to hire. In Illinois, I've been working with the state legislator on this issue, and they're like, what do? We're funding this, but the jobs are staying open. And it's like, yes, because people can't pass the test. Because people who've been in the field for 10 years doing the same job are getting fired instead of promoted because of this test. And so folks who are asking about alternatives and things like this, let me put it this way, and I said this in podcasts too, of like, why is a test so much more persuasive to you than minimum 4 years of school, 4 or more years of supervision and additional training, 2 in school, 2 out, and ongoing education requirements? If those things on their own, if those hoops are not enough, why is a multiple choice test the key to the equation? What does a multiple choice test do that all of that doesn't do? And for the folks that have said, well, quality is variable. Yes, and guess what? I know a lot of really low quality folks who passed this test. They didn't go back and make people take the test who were already licensed when the test was implemented. And those people are still practicing, many of them, because again, the test is younger than my parents. And I'm only how old am I? I'm only in my early 30s. So it's not that old. The test is like 40 years old, barely older than me. And so none of those people had to take it. They're not a threat. Interns, they don't have to take it. They're not a threat. Other case managers pre-grad school, I did the same job pre-grad school as a community support team case manager that I did coming out of grad school as a community support team case manager. I had a full caseload of therapy clients 3 years before I had my clinical licensure. That's not a threat. So why a test? Why this? Why this known damaging, problematic measure when we have so many other issues? The same documents of standards and ethics for assessing competency in the psychological fields, the same document has alternatives to the test listed in it: portfolio models, oral exams, etc. It's just racism and ableism for the sake of racism and ableism at this point, and it's expensive at that.
So I'd like to add a few layers on this that I think is also helpful to think about testing more broadly, right? Because I remember 2 years ago, it was summer of 2020, and Dwight, the past CEO, on a Facebook live discussion was like, all standardized exams have disparities. So we know it's going to be there. And his implication was that was okay. And as a social worker focused on social justice, I was just like, he can't be serious. They're going to take this video down. There's no way you can make that claim. That is fundamentally against our ethics. But what we do know about standardized tests is they've been racist since the beginning. So one of the links that we'll have and the stuff that goes out afterwards explains all of that. But that is why you see places trying to get rid of the SAT and ACT, because data about your high school performance is a better predictor than those exams. Graduate schools are stopping using the GREs. Standardized testing is not a good measure, period. And they're racist, period. So social justice wise, stop using them. Why are we even doing that? But even within that, one of the things that ASWB does is they build a blueprint for the exam. This is one of the ways I think that the system sort of re-perpetuates itself. That blueprint, they send a survey out. The last one done in 2017, 79% of the respondents were white in the US, and 85% of the respondents in Canada were white. You can only answer that question if you are licensed. So if you have, say, ran out of your renewals after trying to take the test for 10 years and are kicked out of the field, you don't get to be counted. So that's the blueprint that the exam then gets built on. It is skewed from the foundation because it's based on a skewed field that they have racistly and ableistly blocked people out of. You can't fix that. Like, I don't know how they think they can fix that. Just get out of the way.
Mhm. Yeah. It just speaks to, just because you name something as racist doesn't mean you took action. Like, that is usually the approach of like all of these systems, right? They say, yes, we have disparities, but we're acknowledging them. So that's all we need to do, right? And it's like, no. And every time you go in and you try to dig even deeper and think that you're going to fix it, you consistently make it worse. Like, it doesn't, you aren't doing what you think that you're doing. Like, it does become that it's not even performative, right? It goes beyond that. It goes to just straight up harming people. Like, that's it. Every time you try to think, oh, well, we'll just sit at a table and decide what the folks who we say we are hurting need in order to do better at this product that we've created. And that's been ASWB's approach so far. And I do want to, Cassie has talked about this, Kim talked about, everybody has talked about this, because in the Q&A, people keep talking about the quality of schools are different. The quality of social workers, once again, is different. We are all different. All of us on this panel are talking about the same thing, but we are all very different in practice than what you would expect. So when you are defending, like, we need something, like, I need you to really do what we're supposed to do as social workers and do some critical thinking about what you are saying when you're saying that, and what you are defending, and what you are trying to put up as like another barrier. Like, I need you to, y'all, we got to think critically about the things that we are saying when we're like, what about this? What about that? What about this exam and this organization making money off of us, making millions of dollars off of us, and they not giving it back to us? Because I'd be putting in for my refund check immediately. So Shimon wanted to add something. Go ahead, Shimon.
Well, there keeps being these questions put into the chat, and you were just speaking to it, Bethany, and I'm not the chat, the Q&A, sorry. And I see it again, and it's like this same argument that keeps coming up, like, we need to be careful to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, I see it in this one, and it's like, again, this test. So like, again, we're on the defensive because we're challenging what's normal, because the ASWB was so good about getting all this power and establishing themselves that, like, to challenge it, people start saying, oh, well, we, you know, what about how are we going to make sure that there's some adequate replacement? But like, this is not adequate. Like, why are we defending? It's like over and over and over. Like, people are defending something that doesn't even do what it says it does. And what it actually does goes against everything we're supposed to be about as social workers, right? We're supposed to be about social justice. The revised code of ethics says we're supposed to act against oppression. And so, like, what are people afraid of? Like, I guess that's what I would ask, is like, where is this coming from? Because we look at the pass rates, we look at those numbers, and of course, there's going to be different social work programs all over the country. Fine. Like, are you going to not accredit those programs then? There's also programs that claim to be great and have higher pass rates on this exam, and they're not teaching anti-racist or anti-oppressive practice. They're teaching an oppressive way to be, because if you do really well on this exam, you might be practicing in an oppressive way. So it's just like, we really have to question this at its core. But if we look at the numbers and we look at who is passing the exam and who is not passing, based on the data that they have provided so far, it is doing harm. Like, so as a profession, we are doing harm when we defend this exam. So one of the things that I've learned through this process, and like, I am not an expert, like, I am just I've been in social work a long time. Before I was in social work, I did community work. I was an organizer. I did activism, like, and I care a lot about this. And so like I'm learning as I go with certain things. And one of the things that I was told is like, this is for a state to use this exam, whatever the intention behind the exam is, it is the functional equivalent of racial discrimination, because that is what the function of the exam is doing. That means then that there are a number of Black, Latina, Indigenous social workers who cannot practice as licensed, which means who then is practicing in those communities? Who is available? How can people get the mental health services that they need when a Black person wants a Black social worker, if the numbers aren't there? So then who is providing those services, and how are they providing those services? And are they doing harm? Those are the things we need to be talking about when we talk about this exam, not, oh, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, the exam is a problem. The exam is not a good thing.
And I must say, using that analogy, baby with the bathwater, that's why we got indoor plumbing. You don't got to throw the bathwater out. It go down the drain. Like, the thinking, like when I hear that's the analogy, that tells me where your thought process is. And it's not with today. It's not what is needed with the real issues that we need to talk about. So like, again, critical thinking, it is a skill that we all really need to use when we are trying to come up with in defense of things that is clearly doing harm to folks.
Yes, I want to attempt to do two things with a response to the question around, realistically, do we believe the ASWB will get rid of the exam? And so the first point is I really want us to understand that I don't think social workers are saying nothing needs to be there to help identify somebody, right? To be able to be prepared to practice, whatever that looks like. There needs to be a process. Something needs to exist. What we're saying is that something does not need to be this exam, because it has not always been this exam. For some folks, their pathway to licensure looked like case reviews, supervision, consultations, oratorials, had nothing to do with taking an exam. And so I need us to go back to having the radical belief that what we're dealing with now does not have to be our future. Something else can happen. And the second part is I want to help localize these efforts. It's not about the ASWB getting rid of the exams. It's about our states getting rid of the exams. We have to help our states and our boards. That's not even help. We need to demand and make them listen to us to further understand we don't want the ASWB to be here anymore. We don't want the ASWB exam to be used here in our state anymore. So how do we prove that the ASWB is not relevant to practice into the future of social work? That's really where our call to action comes. It's proving the irrelevancy of the ASWB. So it's not about them getting rid of the exam. It's us organizing and doing the work at our local level to say, hey, this ain't working no more. We want to create something else that's more equitable and provides pathways to licensure for folks of various communities and ability statuses. And so I want y'all to know, like, the power lies in us and not behind this nonprofit that acts like an enterprise.
And not to mention, to add on that, so in the Q&A, there's been some folks that are like, but schools are like schools aren't teaching right. Okay, cool. So your proposal to questionable quality schools is to continue to allow states and the profession to hide behind an exam that's racist? Not to fix the curricula, not to go to CSWE and be like, hey, I don't feel like you're enforcing this. Hey, I don't feel like, in that case, guess who else is on the chopping block? CSWE. That's who deals with the curricula. The idea that we leave injustice in place because there are issues elsewhere is wild to me and lacks imagination. in a way that is incredibly distressing, especially for a profession that is supposed to be of people who are able to think about and solve complex issues in a multimodal sort of way. And are we saying that this is simple work? Of course not. We're talking about a disjointed system that was built to keep us out on more levels than just the ASWB, right? We are talking about the fact that we have to appeal to states who are criminalizing this profession in the first place. Like, the things passing in Florida right now, I don't know how Florida social work programs are even going to stay open. And Shimon can talk more to that because I'm not in Florida. But the point being is that we are complex beings who can handle complex problems and go after these issues in complex, multifaceted ways. And so it's really a point where we are saying that the way we get rid of this test is to get rid of it. We are saying that if we have all these other options that are failing us, the point is not to leave a failing option in the mix. It's to take it out. And if people are still having problems and still concerned, right, about the safety of clients and the safety of the population, right, then we need to address that. But we're not addressing it. We're sitting here and hiding behind these tests that we know are racist and designed to be racist, and no one thinks it's a personal attack. I think the idea here is that we're passionate about this issue, and that it is frustrating to see others in our profession lacking that kind of imagination and ability to take on what we as social workers agreed to take on, which is interconnected systems that are harming people. And that the options we have open to us, both from within the United States and outside the United States. I said at the beginning, I answered the question, do other countries require these kinds of high stakes racist tests? And the answer is no. Many are still using certification models. Many are using portfolio models. Jen can talk more in depth to these if we have time, but I think that the idea of, well, this is complex, so we just leave it alone, or this is complex, so you have to wait, is what we've been waiting on already, and the waiting hasn't happened. And so we move into what we social workers do, or at least what I believe that a profession that espouses the things that this profession espouses should be doing, which is to follow the money, which is to say, it's really interesting to me that these social work boards have non-licensed, non-social workers making these choices. It's really interesting to me that these tests in a profession that espouses it being important to have people who look and sound and speak our languages as our providers, these tests are still to this day created by 78 or more percent, Jen, check me on this, 78 or more percent white cis female social workers. That there are people writing these questions that have never practiced a day in their life and will proudly tell you that. And so it's no wonder that from the way the ASWB fails to communicate to us and fails to build relationship, one of the keys of our profession, of any therapeutic profession, is relationship, and ASWB fails to have any relationship. I just went to the ASWB conversation, which is actually a research study that they have hired outside consultants to do, and no one from ASWB is there. And it was stunning to me how poor any methodology, any marketing, any outreach has been. And I think being able to acknowledge these pieces is absolutely vital. And being able to put these together and think critically is incredibly vital, because people are losing their ability to pay rent over a test that is invalid and proven racist. And if you're okay with that, I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions.
I think one of the things that we also sometimes hear is when we push back against the exam, people think or hear that we want to push up against licensure. And we can have a separate discussion about the value and the purpose and the white supremacy in licensure, separate from conversation. But licensure as it functions now, right? Even if we get rid of the exam, you still have a board that you answer to. Plenty of people have taken the exams and still end up in front of the board because of disciplinary actions, get their licenses suspended, get their license on probation. All of that process still happens without an exam, right? That harm happens with the exam, but process doesn't go away. The other thing that we are seeing is, to get that clinical license, you have to do supervision. And states are starting to do a little bit more structure around supervision. So we have CSWE to say, like, this is the bare minimum for accredited programs and a regular process for overseeing that. States are now starting to do a similar thing with supervision. They're requiring like certification processes or oversight that like to make sure that the level of supervision is also consistent. So I think we can make arguments that like all of those other protections are probably adequate, like Cassie was saying. For those who want to get involved, we have kind of a private space to connect and network. We have an email, stopaswb@gmail.com. And if you want to get involved with us, you can email us. And we can connect you with our larger coalition. It's not just the original signers on the petition, but the work is really happening in the states. Some NASWs are on board, like Illinois, mine in Michigan. Some are not. So when NASW is on board, that helps to connect with them. Where it's not, there's more organizing having to be done separate from them. So the email again is, our hashtag is StopASWB. That's what we use on Twitter. So the email is stopaswb@gmail.com. Really very simple. Let us know that you want to get involved and we'll let you know how we are organizing. And that way you can kind of be part of the grassroots, but definitely also connect with your states to find out what your NASW is doing. Go to the board meetings. ASWB is doing a gaslighting tour of presentations about how great their test is. And I think sometimes they talk about misinformation. I'm pretty sure they're talking about us. But we're dealing with it straight.
Yes, and I do want to make sure we make time for that advocacy. So NASW Wisconsin, reach out to them, to our social work board here in Wisconsin as well. For those who are here in Wisconsin, you can reach out to them. I've had conversations with Mark Herstead from NASW about this. They are not there yet. They're in the same place of acknowledging that the exam is a problem, but not to the point of saying flat out, get rid of the exam. So it would be helpful to have some additional push and reach out, and they probably will respond to you if you do that. So just everyone that I reached out to, including our state's attorney general, got back to me. It wasn't like the necessarily the answers that I wanted it to be, but they will get back to you. But it takes a lot of work and advocacy. So besides reaching out to the coalition, I want to make sure we spend time talking about like advocacy and making, helping people come up with plans on how to get involved and what else you can do individual, whether you're working with the coalition or getting people together to bring that up. So just want to make sure we cover all that. If others on the panel want to share more about advocacy, either that they've done or would recommend folks taking with next steps.
Yeah. And so I think one of the important things is that, like, when we're saying that we're grassroots and everything, we're not saying that we are small and unaware of efforts across internationally between the US and Canada, right? What we're saying is that we are a network of folks in various areas doing various things and connecting with each other to be able to keep us to keep folks up to date and to be able to share ideas across the country about what is working, what isn't working, who's open to it, who's not open to it, what localities are the best to sue them in, what localities are the best to contact the local branches of the DOJ and things to implement that. We are a network of people of various aspects. I am a clinician, consultant, researcher type who also supervises. Other folks are like Jin are researchers and educators, etc. And so we work together as a network to say, hey, Illinois is super game about a legislative option. We're working with the legislators. We're working on a bill. NASW is also in the room working on a bill. We're just going to write ASWB out of the law. And in other places, Kim may be like, so Virginia is not with it. We're gonna have to use some force. We may need to start looking at some legal lawsuit type of options out here. And that kind of grassroots, where we have folks working on legislation, we have folks working on policy, we've got folks thinking about protests, we've got folks looking at legal options on various levels. And because this is a long-term fight, it has always been a long-term fight. It's been a fight since it was a fight against implementing any of this in the first place, and it's a fight to end the implementation of all this in the first place, because what's really going on is this test was implemented because white social work had an identity crisis and they handled it poorly, and they're still handling it poorly. And so we have a lot of things. Some stuff we can comment on publicly. Other things we can't comment on publicly yet. And that's valid. And so, yes, we're in it for the long haul. And yes, we need to network. I don't think any of us on this panel are in the same state. So talk to your legislatures, talk to your professors. They're probably part of the national board of directors and deans and everything. They've been a huge part of this push. CSWE is trying to get more data because they want to do more research in a way that is actually the proper way to do said research, unlike what ASWB is pushing. And so there are so many facets of this fight because there needs to be, because we can focus on more than one thing at once in more than one place at once, but working together because the power is in the collective. Liberation is collective. You cannot liberate someone else without their buy-in. You cannot liberate yourself without the collective. And so we are working together on our snippets. Yes, the ACLU is aware.
I also will say, for people who are like, what do we ask for? What do we want? In the links that we have, we've included a handful of the different open letters that have been written and our petition that had different calls. We've included a handful of NASW statements that have different plans that different states are working on. Michigan, for example, had a handful of asks from ASWB. So they had to they're asking that they let people do clinical immediately after graduation, but they are planning on getting rid of the bachelor's and master's level and like redoing their licensing so that you don't have limited renewals. So it kind of depends on what specifically is in your state currently for licensure, but if you want to kind of find a place to start and what are other people asking for and making changes, there's going to be some resources in the links we send out.
And I do just want to push y'all, like, this work is big, this work is heavy. You really need to make sure you're resting. You cannot do it all. You cannot solve all of these problems. You can do your part. Like, I can do my part, but when Kim's part is done, I am done, right? Like, it is very possible that I'm a part of something that I may not be around to see it come full circle. And I'm cool with that, right? So I really want to encourage y'all that along the work, and revolutionary and liberatory work truly requires rest. It requires that you share how power and decisions are made. And it also requires you to step back when it's time for you to step back so you don't harm the movement. So please make sure you're understanding that your rest is critical towards liberation.
And do we have time for that one last question of like, if you're not licensed, student, just somebody who's interested, who wants to help, of course there's a place for you. This is collective. This matters. I don't care if you're not a social worker. Guess what? Our inability to get people to the point of providing services means you ain't getting services. That's what it means. It means in DC, they've got housing vouchers that are sitting in storage, going to no one, not housing people who need it because there's not enough clinical level social workers, and that's what's required for the job. And so whether it is agency and county policy to remove the clinical level requirements, whether it is awareness of whether or not insurances actually care what is required for a clinical level license, or just whether or not the letters are there. Like, there's a place for you. There's a place for you in these fights because it affects you too, right? And just like I tell all of my clients, right, it is completely understandable that like fear of new things and fear of change is natural, and that's valid. But if we are making these kinds of high level life determining decisions out of fear, because we're afraid of what comes next, we're afraid of a transition period between this and that, we're not doing it right. And again, if you're talking to an older social worker and they're like, no, we need the test, ask them if they took the test. Ask them if they needed the test. You'd be shocked how many people are really fighting about how we need the test, how we need to be legitimate, how this is a issue about the profession. If we are protecting a title and a profession over people and the people we are supposed to be benefiting and serving, you've lost the thread, my friends. You've lost it. You have completely neglected your duty. Your fear is not greater than the needs of real people. Your anxiety, I get it. Change is scary. It is. We talk about it in therapy all the time. Your fear of change, particularly, my white would-be accomplices, hopefully you'll come on board, but like, your fear is not greater than the impact of these policies and requirements on the communities and people who need and are impacted the most. And if you have these high-level positions and you are noticing that your fear is getting in the way, own that. That's part of our profession. Ask yourself what's going on. Talk to your therapist about it. Work through that. Join an affinity group. Work through it together. Again, multiple pieces. Part of self-care and change is also wrestling with the fears of change.
Thank you. And just once again, I just want to thank Cassie, Shimon, Kim, and Jen for their time. These are four incredibly busy, amazing people. And so for them to grace our conference with their presence is so wonderful, especially when it was haphazardly put together and they showed up and showed out. And so I appreciate all of them being here and sharing all of their knowledge, expertise, and just value and so many things. So I appreciate y'all so much for being here with us today. There were so many things that that could have come up and I don't think we got to it. So thank you to the audience as well for all the questions and interactions as much as we could. And just for being here at the conference. Please watch for an email with a link to complete an evaluation for today's conference, including this panel. You can give us feedback and also another email again regarding CEUs that you will get if you request it. And again, please keep an eye on our Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice website where this panel and all of the breakout sessions and plenaries will be available. And again, you will have all the resources that the panel talked about. You will have those. Please consider joining us and learning more about this movement and doing the work and being involved. We'll love to see everyone be a part of this and really move change forward. So with that, we will get ready to close this panel and we hope you all come back for our closing plenary featuring Amani Barberin of Crutches and Spice. That starts at 2 p.m. Central Time. So take a break, get some water, move your body, do all the things that you need to do, and come back as we close out this 2023 conference. Thanks again. Bye, y'all.